Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my self-chill Bladefall Inquisitor. This build excels at mapping with high movement speed and explosions from Impulsa and Shock Proliferation. At the core of the build is Fulcrum, a unique staff that lets us reflect elemental ailments back to ourselves, and it also has some pretty chunky rewards if we manage to do so. This, in conjunction with the Winterweave unique ring, will make it so the chill that gets reflected back will make us faster rather than slower, resulting in a huge movement and cast speed multiplier. We also utilize both hot-headed and replica hot-headed for an even zoomier playstyle. Usually, self-chill builds have to get 200% ailment effect to reach the 30% chill cap, but the special thing about Fulcrum is that it can reach 30% chill naturally, giving us a lot more options in gearing and the passive tree. To make use of the fast cast speed, we use Bladefall as our main skill, which has been buffed several times to the point where it's viable as a standalone for clear, discarding the annoying 2-button playstyle that BFPB used to have. Against bosses, however, the fast lingering blade application lets us use a Blade Blast Totem to increase our single target damage further. For this build, I wanted a fast and fun mapper for glacier farming with huge explosions and a fast-paced playstyle, and I can gladly say that I found it. With that being said, let's get into the build portion of the video. Alright, so before we get into the mechanics of this build, how we're self-chilling ourselves, how the Fulcrum staff works, I want to quickly put a little bit of a disclaimer here because this build is not a league starter and it's definitely not a beginner build. It's not one of these all-rounder builds that you make and then just, I don't know, do whatever you want to. This is a very specialized build for mapping. It is very, very fast, but it's not made for bossing. So if you're looking for something to heal uber bosses, look elsewhere. If you're looking for a very, very fun and fast mapper, this should be on top of your list. But let's talk about Fulcrum, which is basically the staff that this build revolves around. So if we look at Fulcrum, we can see a lot of lines here. It can be very, very confusing. I kind of dumbed it down here a little bit for you. We're going to go through it one by one. Number one, this staff makes it so that you reflect all the ailments you inflict on enemies back to you. So what does that mean? So basically, whenever you inflict, for example, an ignite on an enemy, you get that ignite as well. Same goes for chill and for shock, and obviously freeze as well. So what does that actually mean? How is this good? Well, the number one thing that it works with is the Winterweave unique ring. In the last line here, it says, the effect of chill on you is reversed. So what this means is instead of chill slowing you down up to 30%, it actually makes you faster up to 30%. And that's not just 30% increased movement speed, that is a more multiplier. And it doesn't only go for move speed, it goes for action speed, which is also cast and attack speed. So think of this as sort of like a crazy, crazy stronger tailwind. But you can do way more with just reflecting ailments back onto you because you also have the hot-headed and the replica hot-headed jewels. So these jewels straight up give you movement speed, and not just a little, they give you 20% movement speed. And movement speed is just really, really hard to get, right? So you're both ignited and chilled, so both of these work for a total of 40% movement speed, and then you also get up to 40% cast speed. On top of that, Winterweave itself also states 10% increased movement speed while you're ignited for a total of 50% increased movement speed. As well as that, the staff also gives you bonuses while you're shocked, chilled, or ignite. Number one, elemental damage with hits is lucky while you're shocked. This basically just means that if you have a high range of damage, it kind of like calculates it twice and then takes the better number. If you, for example, look at a skill like Bladefall, it says 667 to 1000 damage. Somewhere in between is your damage, right? So for example, if it hits 800 on the first one and then 912 on the second one, it takes the higher value, which comes out to like, I don't know, 10, 11% more damage or something. POB does calculate it. Then you have 9% pen while you're chilled, which doesn't matter for us because we're Inquisitor. Then we also get 37% of physical damage as extra damage of a random element. This is just a huge damage boost on top. This is already very, very enticing. I just wrote down everything that self-chill, ignite, and shock gives you. But there's obviously the question of, well, if I inflict myself with even a super small ignite, I'm going to be ignited for like 10,000 damage, right? On an enemy, a 10,000 ignite is nothing, but on you, it basically one-shots you immediately. Same with shock. You don't want to take 50% more damage, right? The chill is already solved with Winterweave. Also, we need to have something against freeze. Now, you might say, well, it's pretty easy to just get ignite immune, right? Or shock immune. But the thing is, we don't want to be immune because immune means we cannot be ignited, which then means we cannot get all the buffs while ignited, right? Which is kind of a problem. Well, what you want is you want to be unaffected by ignite. You want to be unaffected by shock. And this difference in wording basically means if you're unaffected by ignite, that means you can still be ignited, but it doesn't deal you any damage. Whereas with immune, you wouldn't have any ignite, right? Which is basically way, way better because then you get the move speed while ignited, you get the damage while ignited, the damage while shocked. Now, the way we address shock and ignite is basically through the Impulsor chest and then a Shaper mod that is called Unaffected by Ignite. You can only get this with a Orb of Dominance. This is a upgrade to Unaffected by Burning Ground. And these two will basically ensure that Shock and Ignite cannot do anything to you. Now, while Shock only means that you take 50% more damage, if you do not have Unaffected by Ignite, as soon as you just touch an enemy, your HP will basically immediately go to 0. So just be sure that you have these boots before you start the build. You can also craft Cannot Be Frozen on your boots if you have really, really good ones. The thing is, we don't, right? And what you can do is you can do the Pantheon Soul of the Brine King, which says Cannot Be Frozen, right? Very important here is, and I'm going to point that out in another section as well, do not take the last line down here with reduced effect of chill on you. If you already have a Inquisitor leveled or like a Templar leveled, and you have that Ascendancy, there's no way to undo it, unfortunately. So you will have to level a new character, or you will have to live with the consequences. And on that subject, I just want to make sure that you understand. Reduced effect of chill on you does not mean that now all of a sudden you don't chill yourself for 30%, but for 15%. It just means that you have to deal more damage in order to chill for 30% instead of before, right? So it doesn't mean that you screw over your whole build. You'll just have to deal a little bit more damage. So if you have GG gear, it might not be that big of a deal. The same, by the way, goes for Headhunter. So Headhunter can steal a buff that says reduced effect of chill that you can take, which is bad for you. It's, I think, 80%. You can still chill for 30%, so don't be concerned with that. You can run Headhunter if you want to. The same is, however, also true for Impulsor. There is a reason we run Impulsor. You cannot just do 100% reduced effect of shock. It does not mean that you're shock immune. It just means, or unaffected by shock, it just means that the enemy has to hit you harder to shock you for more, which doesn't really work out. You're still going to get shocked for like 50%, so you definitely want this chest. Now, what Fulcrum also does is it converts 100% of fizz damage to Ellie, which is really good for fizz damage skills. We're going to talk about the skill that you want to use in a bit. But basically, usually it's kind of hard to convert all the fizz to Ellie. It's like a cost, right? You have to get a Watcher's Eye, and then maybe you have to get it on gloves or whatever. No, Fulcrum takes that all away. Now, there's 3 different roles here. It goes from 0 to 50. So you can kind of customize what you want to convert it into. I can tell you here that it doesn't really matter as long as you have a high cold. So your cold has to be at least at 30% because you do want to chill, right? You actually want to chill for 30%. That is the most important one. But then fire and lightning doesn't really matter as much. So as for cold damage, that's good because you have more chance to chill for the full amount. Fire damage is good because we're running Herald of Ash, so that damage portion gets multiplied by Herald of Ash. And then lightning damage is also good because now you're going to shock for a little bit more. So none of these are bad. I would just say that your cold should be at least 30%. Even better would be 40% or something. So this one definitely isn't optimal. Another role you want to be looking out for is the physical as extra damage of a random element. That is also very strong. But it doesn't end there. We're an Inquisitor, so this weapon actually has quite a bit of flat physical damage, which we can use for Battle Mage, right? So we have Instruments of Virtue here, which gives us Battle Mage, basically adding the weapon damage to our spell, which means that the physical damage roll and the quality on the weapon also matters. So yeah, it can be pretty rough to actually roll a good one. You can also just buy some Divines and try for yourself, but all of these parts do matter. Now, a question I get a lot is, why am I using Bladefall and not some of the other skills? We're going to go over them. Number one answer is you can actually play a lot of these skills as well. I will just tell you why I didn't. That doesn't mean that you cannot use this shell for a different skill. There's no, like, Fulcrum is only usable with Bladefall, right? There's a few reasons why I chose it, and I will just line them out here. Number one, the amounts of lingering blades that you put down are very important for your Blade Blast, right? Which I have in a Totem. And this build is around getting a ton of cast speed, so you can just leverage that quite a bit, right? You can put down lingering blades very quickly. But it's not just about Blade Blast, right? Bladefall is actually just a star on its own. when coupled with Awakened Spell Cascade, right? Like, this has a ton of AoE, as you can see here. It's actually kind of crazy. Look at where all of these Lingering Blades go, right? So for single target, you can do stuff like Intensify and Conc Effect to get those, to kind of like pin those Lingering Blades down so your Blade Blast can do the work. But again, at clearing, this is really, really strong. It has a lot of AoE. And also, the damage just got buffed last league by like 50%. And what they wanted to do is, right, they wanted to bring all the spells up so they can be self-casted. But Bladefall was already being self-casted, so it's just straight up a 50% buff. So overall, I would just ask you to try it out, right? But let's go with the other options. So the reason I'm going to go through all the Fizz skills is because this staff really, really incentivizes you to go Fizz. If you just go for a lightning skill or whatever, it won't really give you much. There's not really a lot of reason for it. You might as well just go for a +5 staff. But yeah. Ethereal Knives is just incredibly strong at clearing, right? It has a nice playstyle. It's very fast already. The problem with it for me was just that the single target was really lacking. Now, usually for mapping, that doesn't really matter. This is a mapper after all, but it doesn't have something like a Blade Blast Totem setup to just one-shot bosses. So in the end, it kind of felt a little bit bad. I think if this was last patch, I would have thought differently, but this patch, some of the rares are just too chunky for EK to really be that great. That being said, you can definitely try it out. Just know that for EK to work, you're going to need a lot more gear than for Bladefall to work. Now, when it comes to Reap, I think Reap is actually decent if you're fine with some of the dead spots that it has. So this skill is just kind of weird, right? If we look at how it works, it always looks like it hits everything, but there's some dead spots in between. I honestly just felt like it didn't really do the trick, but also something you can test out. At the end here, obviously, a skill that people love is Blade Vortex. I just want to point out why Blade Vortex doesn't fit into this build at all. If we go back to what Self-Chill actually gives us, and like Self-Ignite or whatever, 30% more cast speed and 40% increased cast speed. This is a huge part of your damage and how the build feels. But Blade Vortex doesn't work that way. It does not hit faster if you have cast speed. The way you play Blade Vortex always is with Unleash, right? You just press it and Awakened Unleash once. You have 5 stacks, you press it again, you have 10 stacks, that's done, right? You don't want to click 10 times ever, right? So the cast speed just doesn't do anything. And the tick rate does not get scaled by cast speed. So basically, you're just throwing all of this away into the trash, and you are only, I mean, you're still fast, but you're losing like 60% of the damage incentive that Self-Chill or Ignite actually has. So don't get me wrong, I think Blade Vortex is a good skill, just not for this Fulcrum shell. Now, a question I get a lot is, why do I use Blade Blast together with a Spell Totem? And the reason is pretty simple. Number one, I don't really want to press 2 buttons. This is a mapper. I just want to press a button, a 1-button build, nothing complicated where I have to think about or stretch or destroy my wrists or anything, right? Bladefall is way more than enough for mapping. But whenever you are at a boss, you don't really want to press Blade Blast on this version of the build, because you cast Blade Blast, you have to like stop casting Bladefall. So you're going to stop to apply new Lingering Blades. And the way it works with Spell Totem is you put down your totem, and while you're putting down Lingering Blades, it's just going to explode everything as it comes down, right? Now, one of the things that makes it really synergistic with Spell Totem is that you have the less damage multiplier, which is huge, I get it. But you also have the less cast speed, which doesn't really matter, right? Because once you cast Blade Blast, all the blades are going to get exploded, right? And you're not going to put down enough blades to where if this didn't have the less cast multiplier, it just wouldn't have that many blades to explode. So in the end, it just doesn't matter, right? The less cast speed is not really that important. With that being said, if you don't mind pressing 2 buttons, I mean, you can remove the Spell Totem and just press it yourself. Now, I already showed you the build in the intro, but I still want to give you kind of like a playstyle showcase so you know what you can think about. Now, we're going to do a little glacier here real quick, and we're going to pop right in. I'm going to pop some of my Sentinels, right? I'm going to show you how this build plays. Number one, on left mouse, we have Molten Shell. This is basically, so it's always up. Cosmic damage taken would be very gem intensive, but you can try it out. It also costs a lot of mana. So then your Molten Shell would have to be on life tap, right? Assassin's Mark, we only press against bosses. Zealotry, we basically press like once or twice whenever we remember it, right? After that, we have Leap Slam, which is our movement skill. And then we also have the Blade Blast, which is on a totem, which we only put down at the boss. And then we have Bladefall, which is basically our main skill, right? So let's just show you how I would play this. I'm just gonna pop the red sentinels. We're gonna jump in here and everything explodes. Now I'm gonna pump the blue sentinel. Let's just kill everything. I'm gonna loot a little bit later, but basically let's just jump through. And as you can see here, there's a ton of explosions, just a ton of fun on the screen. I don't have any herald effects going on right now, so there's not really anything like that. But we just jump in and we get a ton of loot. Let's see if we can get another blue explosion. That was pretty bad, but whatever. Let's just pop it off and let's get you to the boss so you can see how that would look like, right? So as you can see here, mapping, really fun. Now at the boss, right, all you have to do is you can do your assassin's mark, but usually the boss is going to be, you put down your totem, you press Celatry, you pre-summon some of the lingering blades, so when he comes down, the totem is immediately going to blast up all the lingering blades that are on the ground here. Now, against big bosses, you definitely want to replace increased critical damage with Conc Effect. Now, what Conc Effect will do is, as you can see here, these are really spread out. So a lot of these blades are going to be wasted on the side where the boss isn't even there, right? You want to have that a little bit tinier, right? So that a lot more explosions are going to overlap. So for example, against Guardians or anything like that, not that this build is made for it, but you can do them. You just have to do stuff like Intensify or Concentrated Effect. Then it will be all good. As for defenses, something I want to point out right at the start so you don't forget it. Do not get the 50% reduced effect of chill on you. This will make it harder for you to get to the 30% threshold to actually chill yourself fully, especially against bosses. You're going to see the difference quite a bit. The problem is if you unlock this, you cannot undo this. So please don't kill Tanner Lightfoot or whatever. My general defenses on this build are, I would say, adequate for a mapper, right? If I press my Granite Flask, I will be up to almost 30k armor. I also have a Molten Shell to make use of that, right? Our evasion, we're not really scaling evasion that much. You can't really fit Grace into it all that well, but we still can push the Jade Flask, which gives us 40% chance to invade, which I think is still worth it even without Grace. Big problem is that we actually don't really have spell suppression. Our spell suppression chance is like 9%. Now, with Spacebar, with the Quartz Flask, that's 19%. Now, that is definitely a thing that you can change with currency, right? My helmet doesn't have it. My gloves don't have it. On the boots, it's just going to be really hard because you need to target unaffected by Ignite, and Tailwind is also really good. So it's, and your chest armor is taken by Impulsas, right? So it's just really hard to get spell suppress capped. What I will say is that even though you're probably not going to get capped, getting like 2 or 3 rolls, getting to like 70%, if you want to be a little bit tankier, is really nice. Now, as for recovery, that is where we excel because we are a Inquisitor, right? We do have the Pious Path up here, which gives us basically the region that we have on our life, on our energy shield as well. We don't have too much right now. I don't have like really GG gear or anything. You can definitely go up to like 2.5k energy shield and like 5.5k life. I'm also missing 2 more levels. Basically, in terms of regen, we're crazy strong, and we also have Leech on top of that. So yeah, regen is not going to be a problem. The main problem are going to be spells, so kind of look out for some more spell suppression chance. Now, talking about Ascendancy, we are an Inquisitor, and number one, I want to tell you here, we have 5 notables, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How is that possible? We are using Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh. And something I want to point out is I have, I think, Pious Path here, right? But it does not matter which of these you have. You can have either Inevitable Judgment or Instruments of Virtue or Pious Path, right? And whatever you have, then you just path to the other ones. So it does not matter which you have on the Forbidden Flesh. You have 3 different choices there. As for the choices themselves, Righteous Providence, incredibly strong, right? You get a lot of crit chance. You even get some Strength at Int, which does scale your life and energy shield. And the big payoff is Inevitable Judgment. Now, this one is huge. Critical strikes ignore enemy monster resistances, which against single target, we have 100% with Assassin's Mark. So their resistance doesn't matter. Now, in a patch where there's rares with like 70 plus resistances quite a bit, this is huge. Now, what this also does is it lets us not use Omniscience, Crystallized Omniscience, which is insane. Because if we run Crystallized Omniscience in a hybrid build, that means we take away strength bonuses, which is life, and intelligent bonuses, which is energy shield. So saving 50 exalts for not having to use Omni, real nice, but the big payoff is obviously that you can use some of the new crazy amulets that you can make with the recombinators, right? So definitely watch out for that. Maybe have some fun gambles there. But yeah, next up, Instruments of Virtue. I already talked about this in the intro section about Fulcrum. This gives you Battle Mage, and Battle Mage, as you can see down here, gain added spell damage equal to the damage of a main hand weapon. Fulcrum has a lot of physical straight up damage, which then gets converted and scaled by all the fizz as extra element. Then we have Sanctuary, which straight up gives us increased damage taken to enemies, which is sort of a more multiplier. And you have Consecrated Ground around you while stationary. Couple that with Pious Path, which means that Consecrated Ground lingers around you for 4 seconds. And what that means is basically you have a perma-consecrated ground around you, which gives you regen, it gives you mana regen, and it gives you reduced effect of curses. And on top of that, it also means that all the life regen that you have also works for your energy shield, which is pretty crazy because let's say you have 10% life regen. That will mean from 4,730, that is like 473 life regen per second, right? That gets 1-to-1 translated to energy shield, so you get 473 energy shield per second, which in this case, I only have 1,500, so that's like more than 30% energy shield regen. But let's go through the items. Number one, we have the Fulcrum, which this build is revolved around, right? You reflect elements back to you, and that gives you a ton of bonuses. I'll talk about this in the mechanics section at the start if you want to know more. This will make you very, very fast. As for impulsors, the most important one here is that you're unaffected by shock. Now, you can also go for immune to shock somewhere if you really want to. You will not get the elemental damage with hits are lucky while you're shocked, but this is it's just a no-brainer for me because it also gives you explosions, right? On a mapper, explosions are just so important. And on top of that, if you look at the implicit here, shocks you inflict spread to other enemies within a radius of 14, basically making it so you can like prolif your shocks and therefore get like shock explosion chains. And on top of that, since it's a unique chest, you can also get fancy stuff like a +2, +1. Obviously, the GG one would be like a +4 or a +2 and then a +1 level of socketed gems. Next up, your boots is extremely important because you need the unaffected by Ignite. You cannot go without. You're going to one-shot yourself to your own Ignite no matter what happens. Now, you're maybe going to think, oh, no, I'm just going to out-regen it, right? Because I'm not scaling any Ellie, right? It doesn't matter, right? Like, all the crit doesn't scale my Ignite, so I'm going to be fine. Well, you're not. You have to think about it this way. What's a good Ignite? That's like 1,000,000, right? 1,000,000 would be a decently strong Ignite. So if you say, for example, 10,000 Ignite, that would be so weak, right? No scaling whatsoever. Well, think about you getting ignited for 10,000 damage per second, right? And look at your HP. If you have like a collective 6,000 HP, it's gonna one-shot you immediately. So you need unaffected by Ignite on your boots. Once again, this mod is being made with a Orb of Dominance, right? You have to have unaffected by Burning Ground plus another mod on your boots. And then you have to upgrade that. You have a 50-50 to hit the unaffected by Burning Ground. And the upgraded, the elevated Shaper, as you can see in the first line here, is then unaffected by Ignite. Now, then what you do is you awaken or orb that mod together with Tailwind. It doesn't need to be elevated Tailwind, but Tailwind in general is just really nice. Elevated Tailwind will be a lot more expensive. You throw it together, you pray, and if you have a prefix open, you craft on movement speed. Now, you can get even fancier here. You can maybe go for an Ashling, right? And get what I have here, but just better with 30% movement speed. And then also have a craft for example, cannot be frozen. So then you wouldn't need this Pantheon, which would be the GG. But I can just tell you that this is some of the last things you should do because as is, the boots are already really expensive. And you have the gloves, and this abomination was made with recombinators. So if you don't know these mods, if you're like, what the hell is this? These are the 3 temple mods that you can usually just have one of, right? These mods are cracked because I need the resistances to be capped anyways. So we just get free damage on top. It's just insane. These gloves are insane. Now, these can be quite expensive, but you can just make them yourself if you try often enough. If you care about min-maxing the build, something like this is completely insane. Remember to get the shock spread. It's a very important implicit, and spell suppress can be nice on top. We didn't really go the full way, so you can also go for something else. As for the helmet, this is basically a flex slot, right? If you want spell suppression on it, you can also go for a base with a little bit of evasion, right? And then roll suppression, or you can get like maybe a hubris circlet with spell suppression with the new recombinators. That's actually possible, right? On an energy shield base. I would like to get more energy shield I can maybe just throw a Eldritch Exalted on, right, to get another mod. Maybe I'm getting lucky. I don't know. I didn't really do much with this, but in the implicit, you can, with the Eldritch implicits, you can have like spell crit, cast speed is I think the best one, and fizz damage from hits taken as cold is just very nice defensively. And then we have Winter Weave, which is basically a cornerstone of the build. It reverses the effect of chill on you. And what I have fancy here is basically the only thing is bleeding cannot be inflicted on you in the implicit, which means that you don't have to rely on a flask to do that. But obviously this can get expensive, so you can also just get a flask. Our second ring can basically be repurposed to whatever you want. In this case, I took a life and arcane surge on hit implicit. Arcane surge on hit usually isn't that good because you can just throw it on a flame dash or something and get it for free. But in this case, we're kind of gem starved. I wasn't really able to fit it in. Maybe I can somehow, but what I did here is just I threw on some essences, right? And what I did is I used the Deafening Essence of Seal, which gives you 15 to 16 cast speed, and I just spammed until I got like a few resistances to fix my res. If you don't need that, you can also go for some Chaos Res, which this build desperately needs, and then I just crafted on life at the end. The Amulet can get crazy with Recombinators. A lot of the items you're going to see, you're going to be like, what the hell is this? Trust me, Recombinators are crazy. There's a lot of guides out there on how to do them correctly. Definitely check those out. This Emmy, for example, wouldn't be possible without it, or very unlikely, right? Now, the most important ones are plus to levels. These are really, really strong. Whether it's plus to all levels or plus to physical skill gems, right? Cast speed is pretty decent. Crit multi is pretty decent. And one of the things that this build quite lacks is dexterity. So whatever you pick in terms of Emmy, it has to have dexterity. The all attributes roll on top is also really good. Just note that you can also just get dexterity on your ring. It does not matter. Just in total, you have to get to, I think, 159 dexterity. As for belt, I'm just gonna, for the rest of the video, put the Stygian Vice here, right? But Headhunter is a lot less expensive this league. It's also a lot less powerful, so it's not that big of a deal if you have it or not. Obviously, Mage Blood would be GG, as for every single character in this game, probably. Now, Stygian Vices, if you want, so you don't really need the elemental damage with attacks. It doesn't really do anything. You want resistances, you want life, maybe some dexterity. You can get dexterity on belts with the Dexterity Essence, right? So something like that can also be done. But overall, Headhunter would be quite nice. Once again, I'm going to explain this because Headhunter can gain buffs that reduces the chill effect on you, but that does not matter because all that means is that you have to deal more damage to get to the chill cap. It does not mean that your cap gets reduced. So neither Headhunter nor Inspired Learning does brick this build, just to be clear, after the last patch that went out. As for jewels, we're actually using a ton of unique ones, so we'll just go through them right here. Number one, Hot-Headed Replica Hot-Headed. I already talked about this in the mechanic section, but these will make you very, very fast while you're chilled and ignited. They're completely GG. If you can get Corrupted Blood on either of them, that's really good. Hot-Headed, it's probably going to be way easier. You want the movement speed and the cast speed to be higher. The attack speed is nice for Leap Slam, but it's not that necessary. Now, as for Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh, I already talked about this in the Ascendancy section, but what you have to know is it doesn't really matter which one you get, right? Because in the end, all you want is you want Instruments of Virtue, Righteous Providence, Inevitable Judgment, Sanctuary, and Pious Path, right? That does not mean that you have to get Pious Path. You can also just refund these points, spec Pious Path, and then get Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh for Instruments of Virtue, or the same thing for Inevitable Judgment. So one of these three will be very strong, but it doesn't matter which one. The Glorious Vanity is basically there for defensive purposes. So if I put this in here, if I put this in here, this keystone will become Corrupted Soul. This is just a very, very strong keystone for the hybrid playstyle. What you're looking for in terms of small passives, I mean just anything that's like okay or at least a little bit relevant for your build, right? Cold damage is pretty bad. Stuff like Ritual Flesh is really, really good. If you could get this here, that would be nice. So basically the three notables you want to check is Flesh to Frost, is this one over here, right? And then these 1-pointers, which are usually attributes. So you can take a 1-point notable from Glorious Vanity, which can be really good. In this case, I haven't hit a really crazy one. Just know that it has to say sacrifice in the name of Doriani to get this keystone. I'm sure you can get a better one if you look more for it. Now, Unnatural Instinct is going to be here. There's a really good Unnatural Instinct spot. It gives you AoE. It gives you the cast speed right here. It gives you physical damage. I mean, it's just an absolute dream come true. Also gives you a little bit of skill effect duration for stuff like your Zealotry or maybe Val Haste if you really want to run it. And another tech choice that I have is the new jewel, Impossible Escape. This one here makes it so I can allocate passives around Conduit. Now, the thing about Conduit is it's actually really, really nice position because of Overcharged. Man, this node is so good. So chance to gain a Power, Frenzy, or Endurance charge on kill. This is obviously only for mapping. But with a mapper, what this means is basically you have perma Power, Frenzy, and Endurance charges. So it's such a good point to take. True Strike for 1 point, incredibly strong. And Hired Killer will give you even more sustain and a little bit more life. And if you, as I talked about, go for more spell suppression, you can also get reflexes. This will make your Jade Flask better, as well as that this can get you the last 10% you need to 100%. We're also using a Watcher's Eye. Now, this Watcher's Eye I sniped for way too little at league start. This one is insane, right? The most important mod you want is Hatred. Crit, base crit while affected by hatred. This is the most important one. Definitely get that one. Everything else is just on top of that. So Zealotry stuff, which gives you damage. Determination stuff, which gives you defenses, whatever you can get your hands on. Now, as for Flasks, with the kind of region that we have on this build, which is kind of ridiculous because of the Pious Path notable, we don't really need a life flask. It doesn't really do all that much, so we're going full utility. The most important one is Taste of Hate. This does not only give you damage, it gives you a ton of survivability against cold damage and physical damage. So this one is just absolutely a no-brainer. Obviously, a Quicksilver Flask with a little bit more movement speed is a no-brainer. Now, as for prefixes, I used reduced charges per use. You can also go for gain charges when hit, right? The Flagellance mod if you want to. Basically, what we're looking for is we want phasing, so we can phase through enemies while blade falling. It makes the playstyle a lot nicer. Then we want some armor. Armor also scales our Molten Shell really strong. The only question mark here is you can go either Jade Flask or you can go Amethyst Flask. Chaos damage is a problem for this build for sure. If you can solve that with gear, for example, if you have a better ring than I have, then you can use Jade Flask. I just don't really use it because while mapping, the Chaos Res wasn't that important. But yeah, we don't have Grace, but Jade Flask alone gives you like 40% chance to evade. So I thought, why not? Next up, let's talk about gem setups. Our main skill is going to be Bladefall. This skill deals a lot of damage, even without Blade Blast. Blade Blast is completely secondary, and I will talk about it in a second. Now, obviously, if you have a Awakened Empower level 5, do that, right? But other than that, Empower is a very strong support, as well as Awakened added fire damage. Life Tap, which in this case, basically it's just very hard to sustain the mana cost of this because we have so much cast speed. And basically putting your mana cost on life is huge because we have so much regen. You won't really notice it at all, and you don't have to use stuff like a Mana Flask, for example. Increased crit damage because we're kind of low on crit damage because a lot of our jewels are actually unique. And then we also have Awakened Spell Cascade. Now, this is really important that it is Awakened Spell Cascade and not normal Spell Cascade. So if you look at this, normally you just have a normal Bladefall, right? That's going to look like this, right? Pretty small, but doable. Now, if you have normal Spell Cascade, on top of this Bladefall, there's going to be a Bladefall here and a Bladefall behind. But what happens if you have Awakened Spell Cascade is you also have one on the side, right? Giving you more overlap potential and more clear potential. So no matter what this costs, as of this recording, it's like an Exalt or something, get this one. It's insane. Now, we're using a Blade Blast with Spell Totem. Now, if you're confused why I do that, I don't really go all in on Blade Blast. I'll talk about this in the why I'm using Bladefall section if you want to know exactly why. Basically, this one goes into your Fulcrum. I think the plus 2 levels is more important on your Bladefall because you're only going to be using the Totem on like very rough enemies like bosses. So we're using Empower again, however highest level you can afford. And then we're using Awakened Increased Area of Effect. And it is simply just because the more area of effect you have on your Blade Blast, the more overlaps you get from all the lingering blades on the ground that get popped, right? So this one is huge. Life Tap, once again, so you don't have to think about mana. And then you have, once again, increased crit damage. As our movement skill, we have Leap Slam, coupled with faster attacks. Now, you might be a little bit thrown off by this. This is a spellcaster, so we won't have that much attack speed. Will it feel bad? Not really, because all the more action speed multipliers like Tailwind and the Self-Chill also work for attack speed, not just for cast speed. So just be wary of that. As well as that, the jewels, right, the Hot-Headed and Replica Hot-Headed, all also give you attack speed on top of the cast speed. As for auras, number one, the fake aura we have in this build is Zealotry, supported with Life Tap and Divine Blessing. I think we have this here, yeah. So basically, as always, with these kind of Divine Blessing setups, you just press it, right? You pay a life cost, which you don't even see because you have so much regen. This is how you can actually see how much regen we have, right? And basically, this means that for a certain amount, for a certain duration, I think it's around about, 13 seconds, you will have the Zealotry buff for free without having to reserve your mana. And then for our curse, we have Assassin's Mark. Now, there's no more curse on hit, unfortunately, so we can't really automate this. We just have to cast it against big enemies. This one's not that important, but against bosses, this gives you like an extra 30% more damage. So it's kind of a no-brainer. And it will also be supported with Life Tap, so you don't have to worry about the mana. Now onto the real auras. We have the good old Determination, and we also have the Defiance banner over here. In a different setup, it doesn't really matter. The biggest auras you want to have together with your Enlighten, you don't have enough space for second Enlighten, and you also don't need it, right? So you have Determination, Divergent, Herald of Ash. Divergent just gives it a little bit of AoE, it doesn't really matter. Herald of Ash just gives you some extra damage, some extra fancy MTX explosions, and Hatred just scales your damage by quite a bit. Defiance banner, once again, scales the armor and the little bit of evasion you get from the Jade Flask. And Molten Shell, I mean, we have Val Molten Shell as well, right? Just a absolute no-brainer for every armor build. Next up, let's talk about the passive tree. So basically, we have a lot of unique jewels. Definitely check out the item section right at the end. We have 2 cluster setups on top here. As you can see, we have a lot of things going on. We have Corrupted Soul, which kind of lends to the hybrid playstyle. We have an Unnatural Instinct here, right? So a lot of fancy jewel stuff going on. I already explained this. Now, we are not really strength stacking all that much, but we do have 337 strength right here. So we might as well go for Iron Will. It's like 8% more damage or something. What we're looking for in the passive tree is mostly stuff like Dexterity, which we can't really get all that much of, unfortunately. So we'll have to get it on gear as much as we can. And also stuff like just straight up life, right? The life will also, with this keystone, will also scale the energy shield. So life is incredibly strong. We're also looking for regen. So for example, Hearty means that you not only do you get regen, but you get increased life regeneration rate, which is kind of like a more multiplier for regen in general, right? Then you just take more life. Cannibalistic Rite, only take this if you're doing the life tap version, which I would definitely recommend. This will give you a little bit more reduced life cost, which can get hard even with all the regen, right? So that's really nice. We're also using Divine Shield. We're not really building around it that much, but for a 1-pointer, it's always worth it. We take the staff notes here for a little bit of block and extra spell block, and also to get to counterweight, which is a complete insane node, right? Also, just more life in general, right? And now let's talk about the cluster setup. So the number 1 node that you want is Sadist. This node is completely insane. If you've chilled recently, increased damage. If you've ignited recently, if you're shocked recently, we have all 3 of these, which gives us straight up 60% increased elemental damage. This does not only scale the damage of your main skill, because the physical gets converted to Ellie, it also increases the damage of your shock explosion. So yeah, this node is completely necessary. And on top of that, you kind of want one with Prismatic Heart. This kind of fixes your resistances, but that one is not as important. But you just want Doriani's somewhere, the Doriani's lesson, because it gives you that little bit of elemental damage, Leech this life to also get to the leech cap. Then with the medium clusters, instead of getting our crit with an increased crit support, we just go with medium clusters here. Now we have Pressure Point and Quick Getaway. Since this is a mapper, Quick Getaway is just really nice. 5% cast speed, 5% movement speed, some crit chance. Couple that with Pressure Points. All my mediums look like this. Gives you some extra chance to deal double damage. Double damage is really strong because whenever you proc the double damage, that will give your shocks more potency, right? So even if in total we just have 3 of these nodes for 15% chance to deal double damage, we hit so often that we're always going to get a bigger shock. Next up, about leveling. I'm going to go over this pretty quickly because if you want to play an advanced build like this, most likely you already know how to level yourself anyway, so this will be kind of useless for you. I'll give you a little bit of input how I did it. But overall, since this is definitely not a league starter, you will have to have some twink gear or basically some leveling gear. Let's talk about it. So you'll have the usual stuff, a tabby, a gold rim. Nocturnal Caress is extremely strong. 7 league steps will make you fast, right? So far, so good. We know those. And then you're a caster. So what you're going to use is Axiom, Perpetuum, Bronze Scepter, Perpetuum, sorry, ×2, right? And until you get that, you can also use Life Sprigs. If you want to, you can also go for +1 wands, whatever fits your style. As for skill, what I used was Stormbrand. I absolutely love this one. While this is kind of a pain to level at league start, once you have leveling gear and you can push the damage to its limits, this one is huge. This will basically be the playstyle where you just put down your brand, you move, you move, you move, right? And with a tabby, maybe even a +2 tabby, right? Who knows? This will be insane damage overall. Now, as for secondary skill, you can also on top cast stuff like Arc or Spark. I actually took Lightning Tendrils, which I was kind of trolling, but in the end, for a single target, I mean, you're gonna be able to stand there. It does quite a bit of damage. I don't know if it's better than Arc or Spark. Just take whatever lightning skill that fits you. Also, something I really like was a replica Kurui ward. It's basically like a Kurui ward, but for AoE, right? Which is going to be real nice for Stormbrand. And the biggest hitter that you definitely want to get in general for most caster leveling or just leveling in general is Replica Thessalios. I can't believe how overlooked these are, but usually, I mean, so think about this. These are level 20 rings, right? So you can have both of them. Look at the last line here, 60 to 80 cold damage against chilled enemies. At level 20, that is just mind-blowing. That is insane. That is more than a added cold damage support will have at that point. So these rings are just completely bonkers, right? Just make sure that whenever you're using those, you don't have elemental focus on your Stormbrand or anywhere, so you can actually chill the enemies, right? But yeah, those two are going to carry you throughout the acts easy. So overall, what's the conclusion on the build? Well, I had a ton of fun with this, and I'm probably going to have a lot more fun after I put out this video. You can check me out on twitch.tv/Palsteron as always. Number one, Fulcrum is underrated as hell. So a lot of people who know this channel for a long time, I used to make a ton of Fulcrum builds. I absolutely love this weapon. It makes you so fast. It makes everything more fun. I just can't believe that every single league you need some content creator to remind people. Now I know some of you guys on PvP Ninja, I look at it. I know some of you guys are running Fulcrum builds every league, but overall, I'm just really surprised that Fulcrum isn't played more. It's just really, really fun. I guess it is kind of annoying to build around, right? You have to get some very specific items, so it's not that easy to do. Number two, something that I just have to say is we need more fun mappers. Now, ever since the defense rework and the game just getting harder in general, people are put a lot more weight into defenses, right? And a lot less worth into movement speed. I understand that, right? You can't have everything. But the thing is, I feel like if you want to have fun while mapping, not every build has to kill uber bosses, right? You can make a mapper that is just really, really good at mapping, especially when it comes to making currency per hour. Stuff that excels at something is what you want. You don't just want this all-rounder build that's like okay at everything, because you're going to be good at nothing and you're going to make way less currency than a build that's like kind of like min-maxed around mapping. Next up, something I completely forgot is how good Impulsa actually is with the shock proliferation that you can now get on gloves. I mean, it's just a really good combo, right? Usually it's very hard to like chain explode nowadays, but with Impulsa plus shock prolif, you can still do that. And last but not least, this is not made for bossing. This doesn't mean that it can't boss. It definitely can't do uber bosses, right? But just normal bosses or conquerors, it can definitely do. The thing is just, this is not made for it, right? So you would have to put more currency in than some of the other builds that are made for bossing. The thing that kind of irks me out every time when somebody asks, can this do Maven or whatever, it's just, you're looking at a build where clearly I sacrificed a lot to get movement speed, to be fast. And then you're asking me, can this do the content where you just stand there, right? Well, you can, but obviously it's not made for that because you don't need any movement speed to do stuff like Maven or Uber bosses, right? So in that case, think about what your build is capable of, think about how well it does it, and how you can specialize for certain things. But overall, if you try this build out, I hope you have a lot of fun with it, and see you next time. That's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. But yeah, this build has been a blast and is still a blast. I'm still considering what I'm going to do next. We're currently still farming. I want to get a few hundred exalts, probably for my next build, which is going to be even crazier. Next build is going to be huge. I think I'm going to do the boss killer that I want to do next. Going to see how that goes. Definitely check that out once it's out. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.